Hey guys, this is Legion PODFIC, and today we're going to be reading Revived Publicly by Orphan Account. This is Chapter 3. Take a picture, it'll last longer. Jason snarked when he walked into the kitchen at 5:54 a.m. Damien at least had the decency to look down at his cereal, although Jason was pretty sure it was to hide his amusement. Dick continued to look right at him, his expression unreadable in a way that unnerved Jason. Of course, the one time he decided to actually come back to the manor after a mission, it would be at such an inconvenient time that 2 of 3 brothers were awake. He could practically see the gears turning in Dick's head. His brother had that thoughtful expression on his face he always did when he was trying to decide how to approach something delicately with Jason. Jason didn't simply ask Dick, "What's up?" No, that would have been too easy. Instead, Jason made a mental note to wait the hour in the Batcave for his samples to be analyzed the next time he collected something on mission, rather than see whatever leftovers Alfred had stocked in the fridge. "You know we love you, right?" Dick finally spat out. Okay, maybe that was the wrong word, but Jason certainly felt more affronted than if Dick had just point-blank insulted him. Dick's expression was one of empathy. No, sympathy? It wasn't often that Jason was completely caught off guard, but at that moment, standing bone-tired in front of an open fridge in his family's kitchen at way too early in the morning, he was absolutely confused. "Excuse me?" he finally sputtered, hating himself for how weak his response was and how long it took him. "This is a little cheesy, even for you." "That's an understatement," Damien added with a snort. When Jason glared at him, he quickly looked back at his cereal bowl. His posture remained intact, however, and his head angled towards them. Jason narrowed his eyes, watching Damien suspiciously. So he knew what was up with Dick. "And we accept you for the person you are," Dick continued, slowly, carefully, in an all too serious tone. Oh God, Jason couldn't even begin to imagine what Dick was leading to. How could he change the topic? "The person I am. So what, the whole no more murder thing was just a phase?" Jason retorted with a snort. He would so much rather have a debate about his morality than whatever this was becoming. He looked at Dick long enough to see his expression falter, and he turned to search through the fridge to hide a snark. "That's not what I—" Dick trailed off quietly, his tone sad, but his distraction seemed to have worked. "You are doing a terrible job, Grayson," Damien interrupted, his voice ever formal and his intentions hidden to be unobservant. But Jason was anything but. He could see the excited gleam at Damien's eyes, the amusement lining his lips. Either Jason or Damien was about to make a fool of himself. Considering the fact that Dick had already done so, it was probably Jason's turn next. Next time, he was definitely waiting in the Batcave. "I just wanted you to know that we love you and support you no matter what." Dick hesitated for a few seconds, making Jason raise an eyebrow. "Whom you love?" Jason stood still a while longer, almost frozen. Did Dick mean? No, he couldn't. Could he? "Demon child?" Jason summoned. He had waited too long and needed someone who wasn't trying to break this delicately to him. "Dick just found out you're gay," Damien said, raising his hand to cover his lower face as he spoke with his mouth full. Before Jason had a moment to process the news, Damien continued. "You made the front page." He flipped the magazine he'd been reading shut and slid it towards Jason. Sure enough, on the front page was a picture of Jason and his date, sitting in a dimly lit bar. They were in the corner booth. Several empty drinks sat on the table. Jason was laughing, playing with his glass in his hand, and his date had a hand on his bicep. He looked happy. They both did. And below was the caption, "Jason Todd's Love Life, an all-exclusive from an insider." So, yeah, Jason didn't think he needed to read the article to know what it was about. He curled the article in his hand, grasping it before briskly walking out of the kitchen. "What do you mean, just found out?" Dick's voice sounded in the background, clearly annoyed. "It was obvious," Damien said with a scoff, and Jason's hand tightened on the magazine. "Fuck the sample. Someone would send it to him when it was done analyzing, or someone else would take care of the case. Jason really didn't care at that moment. What he did care about is that one time in his life that he actually went on a date. And it actually went well. It was all some elaborate scheme to write an article about him. Fuck. He needed some time to nurse his wounds in private. Preferably with a bottle of something old. Jason, Bruce's voice stopped him, his hand lingering on the doorknob for just a second longer. Fuck. He had hoped to avoid this talk for at least another hour. Would you please come to my office? Bruce asked. Jason resisted the urge to scoff at the question. They both knew it was a demand that he would follow because apparently keeping the peace always fell on him. He pushed past Bruce, up the remaining stairs and down the hallway, until he dropped into the chair in front of Bruce's desk. It was littered with papers, contracts, and most importantly, one shiny celebrity lifestyle magazine. With a huff, Jason sank down further and dropped his head back to stare at the ceiling. First of all, Bruce began, his voice strong, so unlike how Dick had attempted it. Jason cut him off before he could get any further. Dick already gave me the whole speech about how the family loves and accepts me for who I am, so you can save yours. Jason snarked, raising his head slightly so he could barely cross his eyes and take a peek at Bruce's expression. He looked taken aback, and Jason repressed the smile that warmed him at the thought. I wasn't going to... Bruce quickly corrected, and Jason rolled his eyes. This is about the tabloid. Jason interrupted once more. He didn't really care for any parenting attempts from Bruce today. You need to be more careful with what you say and who you say it to. Jason bit his cheek, trying to push down the resentment that his father didn't care enough to say anything. Even if he had gotten a speech from Dick, which he could barely call a speech, by the way, it still would have meant something to him, even if he would have never admitted it. Isn't all press good press? Jason said instead, sitting up to glare at Bruce. Or are you worried some homophobic business partner is going to drop the company because of your gay son? He sneered, tossing his copy of the magazine on the desk for dramatic effect. His own smile taunted him from the magazine cover. Normally, Jason would feel some remorse for speaking to his father that way, but not now, not today. Today, he had a right to be angry. I'm worried it'll reflect badly on the family and the company when my son is quoted saying, "My father probably wishes I stayed dead so he wouldn't have to deal with a PR mess, and I definitely wish I stayed dead so I wouldn't have to deal with him," Bruce said, his tone icy and quickly putting Jason back into his place. Jason averted his eyes, not bearing being able to look at his father in the eyes. He at least had the decency to feel somewhat ashamed, but his anger was still close beneath the surface. If Bruce wanted to argue, then they would argue. Why shouldn't he say things like that, when the most interest that Bruce had taken in him as of late was fixing his messes, fixing his image? The only thing that Bruce had done since Jason had returned was criticize him. Jason was already gearing up to throw Bruce's words back in his face, but his father beat him to it. I know you didn't want to return to the public life as my son, and I'm sorry that you weren't given a choice. That was unexpected. Jason's words died in his throat. And I know that our relationship has been rough since your return, but you can't be this reckless with what you say. You can't afford to have so little self-control, Bruce reminded him, gently but firmly. Silence engulfed the two, only interrupted by Jason swallowing heavily. I know, Jason hesitated. Sorry. He hoped Bruce understood that he didn't just mean for not watching himself in public, but rather for what he had said as well. I wasn't even thinking. I thought it was just... He trailed off. A date remained on his tongue. He still couldn't believe he'd been that stupid. It was worse than he had expected. It's all right. We all make mistakes, Bruce said, in what he was probably aiming to be a reassuring tone, but came out more awkward than comforting. They sat in silence again, Jason's eyes trained on the edge of the desk. Anything was better than having to look into his father's eyes. You do know that no matter the PR headaches that you give me, you are my son. I couldn't bear to lose you again. Jason looked up at that, so fast he was almost sure he gave himself whiplash. His father wore a strangely sincere expression. Jason could barely remember the last time they were this open with one another. I'm sorry, Jason repeated himself, hating how insincere his apology came in comparison with his father's. I didn't even mean it. We were drinking, and he kept pushing, and I don't know why I said it. Jason trailed off. He didn't know how to excuse his behavior. He didn't know how to pretend that there hadn't been some truth to his confession. Thank you, Bruce replied, short and formal, as though this were any old business meeting and not a heart-to-heart with his son, as though he didn't believe Jason. It stung more than Jason would have liked to admit. What now? Do I have to make another statement? Jason asked, If Bruce wanted to keep this professional, then so would he. He finally gathered the courage to look up from where he'd been avoiding Bruce's gaze for the larger part of the conversation. He couldn't ignore the anger he felt when he realized that Bruce was no longer paying attention to him. Already his eyes were trained on the desk monitor, his mouse clicking away at something and his lips set in a frown. Whatever gratitude Jason had felt to Bruce for his meager apology ebbed away as Bruce made blatantly obvious what a lie it was. I think it's best to be ignored for now. A small mercy. Come to dinner with me sometime this week, somewhere public, Bruce suggested, or rather ordered instead. And we'll put these rumors to rest once and for all. Rumors. Were Jason in more of a foul mood and less desperate to be released from Bruce's dingy office, he might have scoffed. Okay, Jason simply agreed, and clenched his fist with such strength that his knuckles turned white. I'll have someone send you the details, Bruce continued, not acknowledging Jason's lack of enthusiasm. Okay, Jason repeated, already standing up. It seemed to him as though everything had been cleared up. He'd be communicating with Bruce's assistant since his father didn't give enough of a damn about him to try and talk with him. He almost made it to the door, but of course Bruce had to get the last word in. And for the record, I'm sorry if I made you feel like you couldn't tell me about your sexuality. And if any one of my business partners were to have a problem with that, then I would be the one dropping them. Jason, who had almost forgotten the reason he and Bruce were sitting here, wished more than anything that Bruce hadn't said that. The sincere expression in his face only made it worse. All he wanted, and all he struggled with, was to be able to hate his father with a clear conscience. Jason gave a small nod, a small, simple show of acceptance, and ignored the pang of relief he felt deep inside his chest. He didn't care about his father's opinion, a fact he had to remind himself of. Then he closed the door and was finally released from the progress he and Bruce had made. Alright guys, and that is the end of chapter 3, revived publicly by orphan account. I hope you guys liked it, and I'll see you next chapter.